Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the WorkPoint GDPR webinar. We'll just see if a few more people are signing in, but we'll just start quiet and easy. I hope you can all see my screen. For information, we will record this webinar and distribute it afterwards. This is about how WorkPoint can assist in meeting the new regulations from the EU, the GDPR. First of all, I'd like just to issue a little disclaimer. This is GDPR is still very much in the making in some countries, especially in Denmark. We're in WorkPoint, not a law firm, so this webinar is not a complete how-to-do guide on how to comply exactly with GDPR. If you require that specifics, I advise you to talk to a law firm that are specialists. What we will do here is provide some suggestions on how you can use WorkPoint software for organizing your data in various ways helpful in order to comply with the GDPR. So that's the angle we're taking here, and obviously it's a pretty big area, so in 15 minutes time we're not gonna cover everything. But we'll take a few examples out and see how you can use WorkPoint for your business or organization. First of all, for those who are not familiar with the legislation, a little bit of introduction, some of the key points. Basically, a lot of the member nations in the EU already had these legislation. Similar rules. This is a harmonizing effort, and there will still be special national rules throughout the EU, but there will be also the overlying GDPR. So for some countries it'll be more of the same. That goes for Denmark as well. But what it is also is that it's a more risk and more process-focused approach they're taking. So the whole idea is to try and prevent too much of personal data floating around completely unmanaged. And you can say generally taking care of personal data is not a bad thing. Also, they introduce some quite heavy fines for not complying, so that's a difference, at least for Denmark. A very important thing in the GDPR overall is documentation. Documenting what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it is a focus area in the GDPR. Personal data, what is actually personal data, what do they expect from this? And in the regulation, it's a very, very broad definition. It's pretty much any information regarding an identified or an identifiable person. So that would be anything from name to hair color, race, religion, address, everything, email address. So in principle, and I've actually sought a lawyer's advice about this, when you have an email, you have an identifiable person. So you have an email address and a name, so that would be personal data. So a lot of mails are suddenly considered personal data. They divide it up typically in normal data and sensitive data, where the normal data is name and address, that kind of stuff, whereas sensitive would be things like race, biometrics, religion, personal information, and that kind of stuff. So that's the very broad definition of personal data, which of course is a bit of a challenge to figure out what do we do and what do we actually keep in our organization. Also, another important definition is when is it actually that we are treating or dealing with personal data, because obviously that's what the GDPR is all about. And again, the EU is very good with these very broad definitions. Whenever you're collecting, administrating, storing, changing, etc., the list here very, very broad. So pretty much for most organizations, you can't really not be dealing with it. You can't really not be keeping it. You have to consider what you're doing when you're collecting the data, what you then do with it. So mapping the processes for all these things and all these areas in your organization when you're dealing with personal data is a good starting point to get the overview. And when you have the overview, you can start looking at what systems can we actually use for this. Also, the organization would be a data responsible. There's two terms here, the data responsible and the data processor. Whereas the data responsible is the legal entity, that's a business, the organization, public institution, whatever, even a private person that is doing something with personal data, collecting it, using it, distributing it, whatever it must be managed. This is the entity that's responsible to the law. It might be that there will be a data processor. Could be an IT outsourcing. You outsourced your IT to another company that will run the servers or have it in the cloud or manage it or configures things. They could be the data processor. You need to make sure that you know who is the data processor in your organization and how do you work with them. A lot of organizations have signed or are signing data processor agreements, which might be a really good thing to get that sorted out with your IT supplier. So that's a little bit about the background, very high level, obviously. Now the challenge in all this is to comply with the GDPR without making it hell, because there would be a lot of extra work if you're doing things manually. So the users will be killed. So in our world, we would need to make it more easy for the users to comply without having an extra workload. People are busy, always busy as it is. So what you want to do probably would be automate things where you can possibly do it. Tagging of the document, classifying the documents, the emails, the data. Some data will have to be deleted. You can automate that as well to some point. You can use dashboards to review what's going to happen. And obviously a strong search in the data. There would be challenges in a lot of documents and emails that are currently stored on shared drives, shared servers. And all of this is completely unmanaged. So doing this in a smart way will be key, otherwise you will have a huge workload in your organization. The assumption we'll take here is that two things are important. You need to classify your data. In this case, we'll deal only with documents and emails, and you'll need to figure out some retention time. Retention time is important because the GDPR states that you can only keep data legally as long as it serves a purpose. So when you have data in your organization and at some point you don't need it anymore. This could be a very simple example. They have an employee who has left the company, so you can only keep the data for a certain period of time after he's left. Probably then you'll have to get rid of it. And that goes for all the information that you have, whether that includes personal data. So what we decided here is to show you how to classify stuff and what to do with you need to set a retention time. We also assume that we have three categories of data. We have category 1 with no personal data content. Obviously, you don't need to do anything with that. You have category 2, which contains the normal data, name, address, etc. And the sensitive stuff, which could be race, religion, biometrics, and similar. So a category would be one way of looking at it. The other thing is to look at the context you're dealing with it. In the context of human resource, for example, you would typically deal a lot with category 3 maybe. And in other contexts, in, for example, projects, you would deal less with category 3, maybe more with category 2. So for each of these and in each context, you could probably set a a retention time, date for when the data must be either reviewed or just automatically deleted. So a couple of examples of how this can be done. We take the example of a human resource. Typically you will need an interview document. You are having a candidate in for an interview. You need to write down what the answers are. And by definition, in this case, we'll set human resource to be category 3. So that will be sensitive data potentially. It's always better to go on the safe side. What we'll use here for this is the WorkPoint Central template library. Those of you who are familiar with WorkPoint will know that WorkPoint sports a central template library where you can organize all your document templates for purposes, various purposes, and they will be organized into the modules. So when you need human resource templates, you'll only see them when you're in the human resource module, etc. But some people might not know that it's actually possible to tag the document templates. So instead of when you're filing a document in the system, normally you would typically tag the document with a classification. But in this case, we will show you can tag the document template. So what we have here is a setup with a interview document we're creating from the central top template library, and the category will already be set on this template. As usual, I've created a little video so easier to demonstrate. So what we're doing here is we have Mr. Bill Smith registered in the human resource module. We will create a document picking the right template, and in the process categorize it and tag it. So we're creating the interview for Bill. Choosing the template we want to use. In this case I only have one. Obviously you would have a lot in the interview form, and I want to save that and edit it. So it's generating the document, and already here I'm forced to set in a retention date, so a deletion date. So I've decided here that we need to keep this for 6 months. So from the 20th April when it was created, it needs to be marked as should be deleted. So now we have put the data in, creating the document. Obviously it can merge data in, merge Bill's name in, and you have the document now ready for the interview. So we'll close that again. Refresh the web. And you can see here we have the deletion date I just put in, and we have also a category on the document. Now you didn't put in anything on the category because obviously that was set already on the template. So in this way you can have a number of templates with various categories, and you can choose whether these categories should be read-only and can only be set by the template, or whether the user should be able to go in and change it if they think that it's not a category 3, maybe a category 2 or category 1. So that's up to you to decide how you want your process. The system allows for both things. So that was setting a quick deletion date and a category on there. Obviously you need to have the process made out before you can set the system up. Next example, we have a lot of mails coming in, also human resource related, and we want to make sure we categorize these as well, because when they're sitting in the inbox of the users, they are not managed at all. So given an example here where we have the same employee, we have this very important email from Computer World Enterprises that relates to a certain person. So we'll go to our employee module in WorkPoint. We'll find Mr. Bill Smith. And we will file the email. Now we've set the system up to prompt the user for a metadata. It's already set as category 3, but as per default, we decide it should be only category 2 because it's not important stuff in here. And a deletion date again. So now you have your email filed and tagged in one go. Quite easy. Now we have set documents and emails with categories and dates, and of course you can now use the system search to find these things, or you can create dashboard that simply lists documents, emails, etc. that are in various classifications, in various contexts, this with the human resource context, and with the various deletion dates, so you can either automate your deletion or you can actually have a review through a search workflow. Now, another example would be a case. Here we've taken a little bit different assumption. Now, a case is by definition documentation on category 2. Again, this is to make it easy. So we assume that when we're dealing with information on the case, there would be personal data in normal personal data, for example, emails. Obviously, you want to be able to change this, but again, it's easier to have it automated and change it if it's not right than to have to go through each document to change to tag it initially. So this is a setup where we have already a document on the case, and you can see I have a GDPR category on the case itself and the deletion date, which should be a year from the date creation. It's missed by, should be 18, definitely doesn't matter. So that's already tagged on the document. Now let's assume that the user realizes that wouldn't be right. So when the document was created, it was automatically tagged with category 2 and the deletion date. You can then choose to change that to something else if you think that's not right. So in this way now the document has been automatically tagged. I didn't show you that, that was done already, but now the user go in and change the classification. Again, all these things can be managed by user rights. You don't need to have all users to be able to do this. That can be done by data responsible persons. That's again how you want to do it. And finally, example 4, we have here an email, same setup with a case, where you need to classify based on the case and make sure the email get the properties set. This example is shown with the setup where you have no email manager. If you have email manager, there's a few different things how you can different ways you can do things, but generally here you just file an email manually. So first finding the case I want to file it on. And then we will drag the email to the case. The system will prompt the user if the user wants to change these things. At this time, no. But then again, if you want to change the things, you can easily go and edit the the data on the mail. Category 2 is still editable, and the deletion date still editable. So it's easy as that. Easy, very easy to sum up. And here we have the emails in the browser, and you can see the category and deletion data are on the list. Of course, you can choose to have more categories, various other classification. This was chosen for simplicity purposes. It makes some sense to have it as easy as you possibly can do. But again, you need to go in and have a look at your processes and when do you collect data and what needs to be done with them, and how long time can you keep them, for what purpose, etc., etc. It's very much down to some proper documentation to describe what you're doing with data and when you're doing and when you delete it and why you keep as little as possible. This pretty much concludes our examples. Just summing it up, it's a lot about getting data organized and mapping process. It's a lot about documentation, but don't underestimate it. Classifying documents, email, cleaning up the shared drives, cleaning up your emails, and getting rid of what you don't need, and making sure the rest is organized and comply to the regulation. It's a pretty big task, and most even in small organizations. We can from WorkPoint assist you, your organization, making it easy for the users just making it a simple task to do it right and not having a huge overhead of manual work that needs to be done. If you want more information, a workshop of similar, contact WorkPoint, contact your WorkPoint partner. We're more than happy to help. And as I said, this will be recorded and are shipped out after the webinar. Thank you for listening. Please contact us if you need more information.